Any connection between masks and the mark of the beast? How should we read Revelation in our current time with COVID-19, the coronavirus, and all of the many things which are going on in our world? There's a lot of things which bring chaos to our world, and a lot of times we look through the Holy Scriptures, particularly at things like the book of Revelation, and we kind of wonder how we should compare them to the world around us. We're going to be talking about that today in conjunction with a conversation that looks at a few different questions, a few different topics and things that have been brought to me. So we're going to have just some fun time talking about a variety of topics ranging from Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the court ruling against her and how that relates to how we should live our lives. We're going to be talking about big tech and what is the biggest threat against our society. We're going to be going through a whole variety of things, including voter registration and just a lot of different things. And keep in mind, when we come to a lot of these issues, one of the great tricks of the darkness is to get us to conflate something which is in the outermost circumference of our life with things that are very close to us. And that is a big problem. We take the things which are very distant from us and we apply them to our personal lives as if they are the most relevant, and they kind of train our brains to overlook the things that are most immediate to our lives and the ones that have the biggest impact on the people we actually interact with. So we're going to be talking about all of this and more, and thank you for joining me. I am Pastor J. Dylan Proctor, and this is the Nazarene Stream Preacher. So we've got a lot of topics, and I don't want to bury the lead and spend too much time in delay getting to talking about masks and the mark of the beast. But in order to really set up that conversation like I would like to, I want us to talk a little bit about what happened in Michigan with the Supreme Court versus Governor Whitmer, Gretchen Whitmer there in Michigan. So the short version of what has happened is the courts have ruled that Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, she did in fact overstep her bounds as governor in her coronavirus regulations, lockdown, and all the actions that she took in regard to the virus. Now, one of the reasons why this is so relevant is because in our culture for quite some time, the most powerful branch of government has not been the presidency, even though that gets a lot of attention placed on it. But in truth, the Supreme Court has really risen to a place where it does have a unique authority that is exerted over all of our nation. And this is something which is fundamentally opposed to the American experiment. We were not supposed to be living in a nation where a Supreme Court ruling, something which you were not a direct party to, has an effect on your life. And I bring that up, and we have lived in this time where people have just bowed down before the courts endlessly, and it kind of is reflective of King George's England, where, you know, whatever the king says, whatever the monarch say, you have to go along with it, and those people have no accountability, and they basically get to impose whatever they want. The Supreme Court has functioned like this for some time, and it has been just perpetually eroding away the will of the people and the ability that people have to actually make an impact on the world around them. It really does fly in the face of the idea of a people who are the ones who hold their government accountable, as opposed to a government just imposing things on people. So a couple of things on this. First and foremost, yes, Gretchen Whitmer has clearly over-exceeded her bounds, and she does not need to be allowed to do this. She doesn't really appear to be fit for office as much as she appears to be someone who just has their will to power, and that's what they want to do. Again, I don't say this because I have any personal animosity against her, but she is a public figure and she needs to be held accountable as such. And the way she has conducted herself as a public figure has been one which has been quite disgusting to the people whom she is supposed to serve. Now, may God have mercy on her soul and bring restoration to her and her family, and that is really all that can be said on that. Now, when it comes to her relationship with the courts, she has kind of decided that I'm not really going to go along with what the courts have to say, which is an interesting thing because for so long, the political spectrum in our nation has kind of been divided where the political right kind of has this mentality that says, well, the courts have spoken and we're going to go along with it. And the political left has really done great works to kind of control the courts and to take things to the courts, and then instead of having things accomplished through legislative branches or anything like that, they just point to the courts and say, the courts have spoken, you have to go along with it. And really, there's been this adherence to the courts in a way that far exceeds what was ever intended in the American experiment. And now we have someone who is on the political left, Gretchen Whitmer, who is now upset that the courts have ruled against her, and it appears that she's just going to more or less keep on doing what she's doing for a period of time without really any concern for the courts. So more than one thing can be true, certainly at once. There can be a lot of different things going on. One, somebody can be a bad public official, and also it can be true that the courts really shouldn't have much say in something. And it's fascinating that now we have someone pushing back on the courts when really this should have happened a long time before now. So those are just some multiple things to think about as we talk about all of this. So as far as the principles behind this and how this relates to you personally, because again, that's where really all of this meets the road. How does this affect me personally? In truth, here in America, we were never meant to be wrapped up in having our personal lives affected by people who are really far off and court decisions that are made that we were not direct parties to. That is just fundamentally opposed to the American experiment. It's also opposed to New Testament principles. A lot of times in life, the world is far more complex than we are aware, and so are the worldviews and the beliefs that people have. This whole notion that you as an individual, that you should have some inalienable right where you can move towards liberty and prosperity, this originates from the New Testament principle where people as individuals are valued. Now, I know a lot of the movements that we have going on right now in our world, and including movements in the church, want to push back and say, well, individualism is bad. And they often conflate the notion of individualism with some sort of self-centeredness, or they'll conflate that with, selfishness, or some sort of hatred for the poor, or someone who is only living to fulfill their own personal will. But that's not actually necessarily true. And individualism and self-centeredness, they are quite distinct facets. True individualism is this notion that says you as a person, you with your personal personage, you have a soul, you have a morality, you have a life, and that is worth living. And one of the great problems that we have with this modern push for collectivism and this modern railing against individualism, which is oftentimes branded as railing against consumerism, though it's a bit of a bait and switch. A lot of times people say, well, if you teach people to be individuals, they won't care for the poor. But one of the problems you have in that is the poor do not matter if you do not value people as individuals. And that's fundamentally true, and that's something that's built into the New Testament. You're not going to have charity towards the poor. You're not going to have benevolence and all of these good works being done for people if they're not taught that each individual is valuable before their maker, that each individual is valuable in terms of their quality of life, that each individual is valued in terms of the good that they have and the sins that they are working against. Without consideration of these things on the individual level, then you no longer have need for charity. You no longer care about the marginalized and oppressed in society. And so how this relates to Governor Whitmer and how this ultimately is going to relate to the masks is we are being trained increasingly with old pagan ideas and unchristian worldviews that say our personal lives, our personage is irrelevant in the grand scope of things, and we only need to care about the big ticket items, which are oftentimes actually quite meaningless in society. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon which happens here with this. And we really have to keep all of this together as we look at the world around us and be making those distinctions which are very, very important. To live a life where the court decision far off has total impact on your life, that is fundamentally opposed to both the biblical worldview and it is opposed to the philosophy that America is built on, the whole idea of divine providence and your personal life mattering. These things, they cannot coexist with one another. And they're not meant to. They're meant to replace the truth and beauty that you can have as a personal agent, that you can move and navigate this world between yourself and God and bless those whom you bless and so forth. But these ideas we have, this over-exercising of power and escalation of things within the judicial branch, and really all branches of government, it is designed to replace the old Christian virtues. And that's just the nature of it. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit because we've got a lot of topics that have been brought to my attention. Let's talk about the mark of the beast and masks. So actually, a couple of months ago, I was on a trip. I was riding up a ski lift in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, kind of doing some fun things with my family, and I got a text message. Somebody was asking me, are the masks the mark of the beast? It was quite fascinating that this came up because the question had been asked of me just a few minutes earlier as we were standing in line, and there was a lot of people wearing a mask. There were some people who weren't. There was a little bit of a mix. It was just interesting how this singular concern with revelation and how we respond to the world around us kind of culminated on the mask and the mark of the beast. And this is not an accident. This is not an accident at all. There's a phenomenon that happens in the world right now where the political left, they bring things into universities, they bring things into the church, and they brand them as being apolitical. They say, we're here to do social justice. We're not being political. When they clearly are being political. And then when anything else is brought in, they say, well, that's divisive and that's political, it needs to go. They get away with branding things as being non-political when they are, and the same thing has happened with the mask. The masks have been branded as, it's just, it's a decent thing. Nobody's telling you to do it. There's no one talking about it. It's like the shopping carts out in the parking lot. Nobody really tells you to put the shopping cart up. Nobody really tells you to wear the mask, but you're generally a good person if you do it. It's a lie straight out of hell. I have never seen anything in my entire life be so told on people to do from the entire world around than the masks. I mean, you cannot go to a single store where there aren't signs telling you to wear a mask. You cannot go through Nashville where there aren't signs saying, face it, masks, fate, COVID. You cannot navigate this world without being bombarded by morality connected with these masks. And that's an interesting phenomenon because early on in the coronavirus lockdowns, I had originally, gave a lot of good words and goodwill towards people who are making masks. And I stand beside that goodwill that I had early on. People were doing what they thought would be best in that situation, and they were doing a lot of good work, and they were trying to actually be productive, and so there was ladies making masks and things of that nature, and I'm very pleased that they had such motivation to do such, because they were motivated to bring good and the gospel to the world. However, a few months into the coronavirus lockdowns, I noticed there was a shift. It no longer was people of goodwill trying to do their best, but there was a change in the winds, where the masks became the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar had made. And all logic and all rationality went out the window. And I found it very suspicious that, people I know who work at different factories and things, their employers would send them letters saying science is settled, which I predicted, by the way. I said, this is going to go the way of climate change, where they said the science is settled, and they never actually show you any science. I did call that early on when I noticed this change of behavior. But they started saying, the science is settled, masks help with coronavirus. And, you start seeing all these things, and nobody ever has any data connected to that, which I thought was very suspicious. And then there was the insane amount of flip-flopping with the mask. You had people saying, they do nothing for somebody who's non-contagious and is aware. It's meant to stop people from transmission. This is why doctors wear them in an operating room, but not throughout their whole lives and stuff like that. And there was just a lot of inconsistency on it, so you can't ignore the inconsistency. You just can't, because that means that people are clearly not on the up and up. They're either willfully incompetent or they're fiendish villains who are lying to you. There's actually no middle ground with that. These people, they're in the highest echelons of the expert class, and either there's a disconnect between the achievements of the modern sciences and reality, meaning people that are this willfully incompetent could not have achieved the things they have, or B, they are being willfully fiendish. They are willfully being evil and lying. And the evidence, unfortunately, tends to go to the latter, that people are just outright lying. So if we as the people of God, we start standing shoulder to shoulder with stuff that is so wildly inconsistent and being so flimsy and fickle, it's going to make you look bad. But back to the masks and the mark of the beast. So a couple of things here. First and foremost, in Daniel chapter 3, I want to read a couple of scriptures. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 15, and I know I quote this all the time, but it's worthwhile quoting in our moment. Nebuchadnezzar says to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose names are also, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. He says, "Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble to fall down and worship the golden statue that I have made, all will be well and good. But if you do not worship the golden statue that I have made, you shall be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" That is how the masks are being treated right now. And you can be an adult and make a separation between whether or not the masks are good and how people are treating them. Even with the golden statue, there will be always a few scholars who say it's probably not gold, it's bronze, but regardless, bronze, gold, a monument like that has actually a substantial amount of material value, and it probably is a rather impressive artistic feat. When you actually see the size of the golden statue and where it's placed there in the districts of Babylon, it actually would be an impressive thing. There's a truth that gold is valuable, bronze is valuable. The substructure that is used to hold the statue together is of value, both the knowledge of how it's made, but also the just beauty of it. There is real value with the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar has made. However, that is not the preeminent matter at hand. The ultimate matter at hand is that thing which has good value inside it and good opportunity, it has been made into an idol. And it's a proxy for other idols. It's a proxy for a lot of wicked things, and you just can't ignore that. And you see, what happens with the mask is people will point to the good and potential for good that is there, and they will then ignore the fact that there is idolatry that has clearly been associated with it. And as mature Christians, this is a lot like the food sacrifice for idols that you see discussed in the New Testament. Paul tells people, don't make the biggest of deal about this. If people have issues in their conscience over it, respect that. If people are hungry and this food is available to them, let them eat it. However, if people are in there and they're just, going crazy in the paganism, that's probably a sin. But have some grace for people when it comes to these matters of conscience. And that's what Paul tells us regarding this. And that's what should be happening here with the masks. But it's not. And even within many of the leaders that we see in the church, they're either generally silent on this matter, which, take it for what you will, that's better than not advancing evil, I suppose. But we have to remember there is no lukewarm sanctuary. There is a lukewarm hell. And when I say that, I'm not referring to the temperature of that hell, but the hearts and minds of those who have made it to hell. There is lukewarmness in hell, in the hearts and minds of people who thought they didn't have to take a stand, but there is no lukewarm sanctuary. Scripture is pretty clear on this matter. But when it comes to the mask, there is grace given that says, well, if people want to go along with the prevailing winds in society, they want to do whatever is popular and trendy today, well, then there's fine, we can do that. But then there's this kind of irrational hostility towards people who want to be critical thinkers, towards people who say, hey, I'm thinking this is a golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar has made. There's not really a lot of grace given for that. They're oftentimes called names. They're described as being raging and all sorts of things, and there's not really any room for critical thinking, and things just further dissolve. Now, one of the things that really bothers me the most about this is I think a lot of the people who are silent, they're acting in good faith, thinking they are holding the line together and they're keepers of the peace. But we are past the point of no return. The Titanic already has a hole ripped into it. The watertight doors were unsuccessful in abating the current dilemma, and we are past the point of no return. The only antidote to this is going to be a principled stand. We are past the point of keeping the peace. That is not going to be an effective tactic. And when it comes to the mask, that's where it really lies. And it's very tragic because we can't be adults and maturely look at things. And I want us to go now to the book of Revelation because that's where a lot of people wonder, is the mask really the mark of the beast? I've got text over this, had people ask. We've talked about it in church briefly. More of these conversations I've had have been between individual persons. But in Revelation chapter 13, it does tell us one who does not have the mark will not be able to participate in polite society. They can't shop, they can't purchase, they can't trade, they can't do anything of that nature. And of course, that's a big problem. And the mask does uniquely fit those aspects. But let me read the scripture and give into my full thoughts on this, and I'll let people make decisions. Again, I trust people to be individuals with personal agency, with minds capable of thought, so I'm not here to micromanage your thoughts, but let me read the scripture and then tell you my thoughts. So in Revelation 13, this is beginning in verse 15, it says, "And it, being the second beast, was allowed to breathe life into the image of the first beast, so that the image of the beast could speak, and even cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And it also caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one could buy or sell who does not have the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. And this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for its number is that of a person. Its number is 666. So, a couple of thoughts on this real quick. What we find here with the mask is, does it fit all of the literal criteria in this? No. No, it does not. It obviously does not fit all of the literal criteria. And when it comes to Revelation, I think the best way to read Revelation is not as some mysterious code to be interpreted, but as the cosmic battle of good and evil and the final adjudication of God's wrath. But regarding the mask itself, you cannot deny, if we are being mature and adults, this actually fits more of this criteria than anything that I've seen in my life. And one of the reasons why is the context of Revelation 13 is the beast worship, where a global hysteria has broken out, or a global movement, I should say, a global new religion, a new morality has come across the globe. There is a beast that has appeared, and its name is blasphemous, its head is blasphemous, everything about it is blasphemous, it is blasphemy by design. And what you got to keep in mind is blasphemy is an act that says absolute good is evil and evil is absolutely good. There's been a new morality which has come onto the earth. It has its religion, it has its tenets, and people worship it. It doesn't say whether they are all, joyfully worshiping it. They're in awe of it. But there is a new religion that has come out, and people are worshiping it. For some reason. So there's a new religion that has come out, which is what has happened in our modern day and age. With the coronavirus, there's clearly a belief system coupled to it, and you just cannot deny that. There is a belief system, a morality of what is good and evil that's not built on long-term principles. It may pretend like it is, but it's not. Personal agency, personal freedom has been thrown out the window. And when I say personal freedom, I don't mean the ability to go and do whatever you want, but I mean the freedom that you can have a consciousness, that you can make moral decisions yourself, that you can decide if you want to visit your sick loved ones who may have one of the most terrible diseases in human history. If you want to make that decision to honor them, then you should be able to make that decision. If your family wants to be able to have a funeral service, they should be able to have one to the full satisfaction of the family. But this has been removed. There's a new morality. The old arguments they had for abortion, my body, my choice, that was a lie to start with, and you can see that that's a lie because people do not apply that now. So all that stuff is thrown out. And you do have this new item which is used that says if people don't wear it, they're not allowed to shop here, they can't come in, things of that nature. And you even have people like the New England Journal of Medicine admitting that they don't really do a lot, but they're talismans. They make you feel like something is going on. The problem isn't that they're using the word talisman, which is a kind of a voodoo witchcraft, magic wand sort of language. The problem is that they're invoking a false religion, that they're invoking something which is a false spirituality. And admittedly false by their own admission. They're the materialist magician that C.S. Lewis writes about in the Screwtape Letters. And that's one of the things that you get with the mask, is it doesn't fully meet the criteria to be the mark of the beast, but you cannot deny that it is much closer than anything I've ever seen. And to that point, a lot of people will look at it and say it's not close at all, which shows that it is capable of being deceptive. When you actually look at some objective standards, are people allowed to shop and interact and trade without this item? The answer is no. It actually meets that threshold. Is it something that is with a new morality, which is just kind of popped up out of the sea like the beast? Yes, it is with a new morality that has just come up out of nowhere. Does it seize the entire world? Yes, in fact, it does. So it does meet a lot of this. And on that note, I want us to change gears and talk about Revelation as a whole and the question of how we should read Revelation in a time like this. So in serious regards to the mark of the beast and the broader question of Revelation, and this can be applied to apocalyptic material in general, I think the best way to read this is to look at the cosmic truths they're trying to teach us. So oftentimes we take something like the mask and we pull Revelation down to our level. In other words, we take the stories of Revelation and the teachings of Revelation and we pull them down to our world and we insert them there. And I think that's actually the inverse of what we are supposed to do with this sort of text. I think the truth of what we are supposed to do is recognize that Revelation, it is a fulfillment of evils that have gone on before, evil methodologies, evil formulations, evil machinations. The mask is probably not the first thing which has been required of people to interact in a given society, though it may be the first globally to be instituted at this magnitude. But keep in mind, the book of Revelation is bigger than even something like a mask. Instead of us taking Revelation in our own issues in our times right here and pulling Revelation down to that, we need to take our times and lift them up to Revelation and realize that things can get much worse. The cosmic battles can get much larger. And the tyrannies, they can get much more extreme. And when it comes to the mark of the beast, that's really how I think we should read this. The book of Revelation, it is the cosmic apocalyptic moment. And it will be a fulfillment and the final form of existing evils. And it will also be the final completion of God's wrath, God's judgment, as we find there. And rather than being something new, what all of this means is matters like the mark of the beast, they will pick up on existing chaotic, moral tyrannies. They will pick up on those things and then exaggerate them, take it to its final extent. And the same thing will happen with God's judgment. There will be a expedited bringing of things to a head. No more continual death and decay. We're going to draw the line here, and it's going to be completed. So that's really the best way to read Revelation. And so as we continue on today, we're going to change topics altogether now, and we're going to go over to discuss, let's see here. We've talked about masks, we've talked about Revelation. We're going to change gears big time now and talk about voter issues. So I got a question sent to me that said, what can we do to improve our nation? Should we have some form of way that people are required to have a vested interest before they can vote? And now this question it came with some potential ideas. It said, how could voting requirements be changed or implemented to better this country? Could we raise the age of voting to around 25 so that full brain development is achieved? And that's in reference to the fact that cognitive development really goes on in a person's body till about age 26. Another thing they proposed here was taxpayers who don't receive more in subsidies than they pay in. So in other words, someone who is paying more in taxes than they are receiving through some sort of credit or subsidy. And then the last suggestion they had was some sort of military/country related service required for people in order to be allowed to vote. Well, so my thoughts on this initially. In the history of America, one of the requirements to vote was that people owned land And a lot of times we are so trained to think in the form of oppression that we don't realize that really one of the reasons behind this is they wanted people to have a vested interest. But I'm not here to adjudicate the past. I'm here to answer the question on how we should do things in the future. So do with it what you like. Maybe you think it's terrible, the land owning thing in the past. Maybe you think it was great. Regardless, that's just what history is. It's not here for us to decide whether or not it is true based on whether we like it. It just is as it is. But when it comes to where we're at now, I do think one of the problems with the question itself, and I think this is an intelligent question that's obviously had some thought put through it, but we have to realize we're talking about a technicality when we're asking, can we fix the country by changing who votes? And the answer is no. That's not going to be a tool that solves really anything, because you still have hearts and minds that are going in a bad direction. You have to keep in mind, you look at places like Portland, and you look at places here in America, people are voting for this stuff. And despite politicians being extremely corrupt, here in Nashville, a couple of election cycles ago, we had a mayor who had an affair with another employee. They spent a bunch of monies. Megan Barry had some terrible things that went on that she had committed. May God have mercy on her soul. May God have brought restoration to her. I know there are some things that happened in her family. Doesn't excuse bad behavior, but may God just be with her. And the thing is in response to her corruption, people basically voted in someone who is exactly like her, but a little more polished, a little bit more veneer. And it's like, okay, all right, here we are. Great. You have to realize that people want debauchery. People want corruption. We are sinful creatures. And outside of God, there is no light. That's just true. I mean, you can read, John writes about this. John the Apostle, John the Evangelist, he writes about this when he's writing his epistles. This is outside of God, there's just chaos and decay. That's just how it is, unfortunately. Now, how this relates to us now, you have to remember our ways of solving the world doesn't fully rely on our shoulders, but we do have some responsibility that God has given to us. We have to start at home with the things that we actually have an influence at. Now, our society has decayed to a point. Just as I said earlier, I think those who are trying to be silent, they think they're keeping the peace. They may not actually be keeping the peace, but actually are just allowing evil to grow without ever being addressed. I realize society has gotten to a point where we're just going to have to draw some hard lines. And may God be with us. I hope that does not get ugly and violent. History tells us that happens. But we also must understand that there is a time to have a backbone. Scripture's pretty clear about this. Jesus even tells us when he returns, he is going to return with a sword. Now, God hates death. God hates suffering. God hates chaos. But that doesn't mean that God is just going to permit nastiness to be nastiness into perpetuity. We have to start drawing lines, and we have to start finding a backbone. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we start telling people no, while we have the high ground and the means to do that civilly, the sooner we'll be able to avoid things violent. You see, people have been silent while we had the civil means at our disposal, and now the civil means have been taken away. So there's not really a lot of good alternative modes of response left. But we start at home. We have to realize the reason why people are voting for this stuff is because their hearts and minds are oftentimes surrendered to idols than they are truth. And now, I'm not actually talking right now about how things are connected to political affiliation. I do think that our modern politics are at the point where one side wants to deconstruct and dissolve America with a very foolish and ignorant idea that they will have something better in mass. So I think there's a small concentration of people who know better than that, and they just want to will to power, and they just want to remake the world in their image. And they're just fine telling people what they want to hear. And the other side is kind of wanting to slouch in that direction. The other side doesn't truly have any principled stands. At best, the other side wants to do technical things, waste, fraud, and abuse. Technical arguments without ever taking a principled stand. This luxurious delusion that you can have a separation from morality and culture, which is not possible. But what we have to do is have to start at home, teaching people that we interact with good things in life. And really what this boils down to is we have to start saying no to people. Teaching our children, no, you can't always get everything you want. Teaching people that it's okay to lose. You don't have to get a participation trophy. There is suffering and there is work to be done in life. Teaching our young people the value of losing. You know, we've had this mentality of zero tolerance for bullies, and it has only made people weaker. It's made people much more pathetic, that they haven't learned how to find a backbone. We have a whole generation of people who have really never been told no, and they don't know how to interact with the world well. You know, this is unbiblical to teach people this. It's unbiblical to teach people that there are no consequences for your actions, that you can live in the fantasy world rather than in the real world. And real meaning more than just what is before our eyes, but also in consideration of our souls, our actions, and the grand, course of eternity where God has made the heavens and the earth. This is very important for us to do, but there are a lot of people who have been robbed of this, who just basically live in chaos. A story came to me earlier this week of someone who's a school teacher. They're teaching online this year. And a problem emerged where they had a student acting bad, visibly acting bad on camera. They were playing with a sibling, and they were fighting with the sibling, and the teacher, sent a letter to the parent, and the parent said, well, they couldn't follow you in class. That's why they weren't paying attention. And I think the teacher was actually giving the answers to a quiz or something that they were going to be taken, was telling people, put these in your notebook and you can use them in the quiz. Some of these answers will be used. I think it was one of those things where they were really giving kids a very definitive study guide and saying, if you study these things, you'll be fine on the quiz. One of those moments where teachers do that. And the parent just ignored the truth of what was going on and said, it's your fault. It's very sad. The chances are that those parents are probably brats, and those children will probably be brats. And this is not how God wants us to live. And I hate to say that. And we can love people who are brats, and may God have mercy on them, but we have to aspire for something better than that if we want to have a society where we can assemble around the common good, moving towards what is noble, pure, just, and the full spectrum of Christ-like love, that singular fruit of the Spirit which exemplifies Christ-likeness in the world around us. So we have to teach people to pursue truth, and truth over feelings, by the way. We also have this modern myth that what is true is dependent on what I feel like is true. That's a terrible lie. But pursuing what is true, what is good. And also changing the voting mechanism is only going to make people feel disenfranchised, which it's okay sometimes for us to feel a little bit of friction in the world. That also helps us grow. That causes us to aspire everything. If people don't feel like there's no challenge to interact with the world, then everything becomes too easy, and you get the social media mob nightmare that we have now. But you do want to have representation of people. But more important than just changing that technical system is to actually do work that changes people's hearts and minds. And for so long, people have had hearts and minds bent towards bad and evil ideas. Now, the question we have after doing that is how much time do we have? How much time is there before the critical mass implosion of America? I think you would be doing a disservice to people to deny that that's a reality, that this is not something which can go on into perpetuity, this sort of vicious animosity. But how close are we? This will kind of come into our next question as well. We're going to talk about big tech and what are the biggest threats we have against us right now. But when it comes to the question of, do we need to take the long march to the institutions like the communists did? What is our path forward? Let me just read what Nikita Khrushchev said regarding America. And he said this about 50, 60 years ago. He said, "Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. You do not want to accept communism outright, but we will feed you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and realize you already have communism. So that's actually happened. When people said that, they meant it. We had a lot of people who ignored this and just said, okay, well, we'll ignore your bad ideas because we'll allow you in on technicality and stuff like that. The nature of that is just a bad argument, and it puts you on a certain path towards depravity and chaos and sin. But I don't know if we have enough time to do that. But Christ tells us, there are times in life when you don't have a lot of time. So go with those who will welcome you. That's what the wisdom is when Jesus sends out the 12. He says, stay with those who will welcome you, not those who will have you. Sodom and Gomorrah will have you. And their fate is one thing, but the fate for those who reject the gospel is going to be something totally other. So stay with those who will have you. Speak truth. Don't be a people who conceal the truth, but say it out on the rooftops. That's what Jesus' wisdom tells to us. And we're at a time now, speak as much truth as possible. Call balls and strikes. Have mercy. Have Christ-like love for your family, your friends, your neighbors, and yes, even your enemies. Love people and say, we don't find it just sufficient that you will be eradicated in final calamity on the day of judgment. We want you to be covered by the blood of the Lamb. To love people enough to tell them things they don't want to hear. To love people enough to be in conflict with them and say, we're going to say no to these bad ideas, and we're going to move you towards beauty and truth. That's what the true biblical worldview does. Whatever sins are attained, they are retained, and that's logical as much as a commandment. And whatever sins are forgiven, which takes the power of God, which by the grace of God has been handed to the church with a degree of responsibility that we can interact with God's forgiveness in a meaningful way. And we have some real responsibility and authority commissioned to us on that front. So that's very important to keep in mind. When it comes to what we do, we must speak truth. If you want to try the paths of the long march, I would encourage people to do that. But don't lose sight of what matters most in life. Get your hands dirty. Be willing to do some manual labor. Be willing to get a little dirty in battle. Don't find your emotional comfort in just the peace of the people around you, but find it in the kingdom of God. So I don't think changing the voter technical processes will do much, and that's my thought on that. And I know I'm just riding around on a horse in Elder Scrolls, but maybe we'll give some atmosphere to this. All right, so let's talk about big tech. And even though I've got 2 or 3 questions I wanted to get to, I don't think we're going to get to all of them. So let me just talk about big tech. So one of the great problems that we have in our world right now is the threat that comes with big tech. Now, the most immediate way that this appears to people is in the form of big tech censorship. And that, of course, is a big problem. But there's even something deeper rooted in that. We have to realize that big tech is not just businesses attempting to do business as usual, trying to corner a market. They're not even trying to be a monopoly in the sense that, say, Ma Bell would have tried in the past. What they are looking to do is be a new moral authority. They are wanting to be entities, institutions that govern us. They're really trying to set themselves up as alternative governments, and you cannot deny that, and you cannot dismiss this lightly. But when it comes to the question of what is the biggest threat we have, I think you can take and split that into 3 categories, and big tech falls under one of them. But you can ask the question, what is the biggest threat we have right now? A lot of people feel like there's a lot of threats in the world. And you can ask this as what is the most immediate threat, then what is the most organized threat, and then what is the most powerful threat. And there's a little bit of a different answer that I would have for each 3 of these, and let me go through them in turn. So to the first of that category is, what is the most immediate threat? Well, I think the answer to that is whatever is most depraved at that moment. And now, in our current moment right now, we have an unholy trinity of political chaos. And now, there is an unholy trinity here, so let me explain what this unholy trinity of political chaos is. We truly do have a prevailing mainstream news mechanism, which is an enemy of the truth. It is far more interested in sensation, it's far more interested in throwing something out, and it's far more interested in news narrative casting than it is actually articulating the truth. And this is not just the biased coverage that you might get, but also the topics which are placed into the public eye. What things do you need to look at? What are the topics you should discuss? Those choices are much more influential than are just the biased coverage that you might give on any particular issue. And we do have a group of people, and the prevailing truth is that right now our modern mainstream news media is not interested in truth at all, anywhere, but is almost exclusively interested in narrative casting. That is a bad problem. That is an immediate threat to our lives because it is extremely depraved. And when you couple that with these other two, because again, this is an unholy trinity. There are three persons that make up this vile entity. The second person of this unholy trinity is the mass possession by volatile insanity. And you find this in the what we call euphemistically civil unrest, but the mobs going out, but also the mobs online that are behaving in just volatile, vicious, insane ways. Hatred of truth, they grow stronger, they draw their power from one another, and they draw their power from the enemy of the truth, news. And the third person of this trinity is will to power public figures. And these are public figures who really don't care about anything true, good, or beautiful. They care about protecting the system. They care about their own will to power. Governor Whitmer falls into this category, just will to power. You know, I like judicial supremacy when it gets me what I want, but when it doesn't give me what I want, let's deconstruct and tear things down. It's time to have more people on the Supreme Court. It's time to do away with the Electoral College. And this is people who are in elective office, also people who are in bureaucracies. You see this with a lot of things which have happened with the FBI and the CIA, where they just, well, we'll investigate whoever we want, we'll frame whoever we want, because we're here to have power. We know better than you. It's also true in the bureaucratical medical expert class that we've seen with the coronavirus, this whole will to power. Who cares if we told you one thing about masks last week and a different thing this week, and they're totally irreconcilable? That is a big problem. And you cannot ignore these flip-flopping things. We should have grace with people, but we must also be people of truth. In the public sphere, we have to apply the biblical principle of you know people by their fruits. And if the fruits of people's actions are that either they are willfully incompetent, negligent, on purpose, or that they are outright lying to you, you cannot go along with that and pretend like everything's on the up and up, because if you do, it makes you be a fool. And this has caused me as a pastor to rethink sanctification and add an addendum to the Nazarene doctrine of sanctification to say sanctification is a work of grace when the Holy Spirit gifts you with eyes to see and ears to hear. You know, eyes to see and ears to hear in accordance with what God wants you to see and hear. And then you're motivated to act accordingly. So you see the world with eyes for truth, and then you just live according to that. You know, just keep it to yourself. So that's the most immediate threat, this unholy trinity of political chaos. Enemy of the truth news, people being possessed by volatile insanity, and people in the public sphere, loud voices who have a will to power. That's our most immediate threat. But again, depravity can shift, so you can find people elsewhere. The next category is the most organized threat. This is where big tech comes in. Big tech is the most organized for long-term destruction that is coming against us right now. And this does play into China and some of our other global enemies, because they kind of feed and use big tech to their advantage and to our demise. But big tech, these aren't businesses doing businesses. They do want to rule you. And not just in the realm of censorship, though that's a very real problem and a very big portion of this, but they also want to control how your mind and emotions operate. They want to control how sensational you are, how impulsive you are, how you communicate, how you navigate the world. And we find this just by the way that they curate information and the way that they push this around, the way that they want our eyes to be on their platforms, the way that they don't really care if you're doing anything noble or true, but just as long as you're there, you're impulsive, you want to value quick, witty, one-line comebacks that are less than 144 characters or whatever it may be doubled to. They want you to value that more than truth. That is a huge problem, and it's organized. And what's terrible is the people that are trying to hold this accountable. I don't think there's anybody in the federal government that is elected and has tried to hold us accountable that actually understands the problem. This is not businesses doing businesses. And this cannot be taken in hand by technocrats who want to bring another, antitrust regulation or something new to the table. A lot of these people who are trying to hold this stuff accountable, first of all, they don't try very hard. It's more about sensation and stuff like that, which feeds back into our most immediate threat. But as far as the benefit of big tech, they get away with a lot of the stuff because many of the people who are holding them accountable, they either don't understand social media, they don't understand the full spectrum of big tech, they don't see these institutions and entities as what they are, and even if they did see them for what they are, they're not the sort of people who take principled stands. So that's a big problem. This cannot be taken in hand by technocrats. This is a matter of principle. We're not meant to be ruled by big tech. They're acting like publishers, editing content, but they're reaping the benefits of being a common carrier. They're doing something which is in conflict, and it only is causing chaos. They enforce the laws that are on the books and take a principled stand. So we're getting close to an hour. That's where we're going to wrap up our conversation today. Oh no, I haven't got to our most powerful threat. Forgive me. I haven't gone through all my notes here. The most powerful threat we have right now is our own demoralization, our own willingness to conflate good and evil, to think that our personal beliefs are something which are in fact personal and they stay within ourselves, our own willingness to be silent when there are people coming and breaking in our door, our willingness to go along with these fake virtues, these fake principles that are all designed to get us to bow down to the golden statues which Nebuchadnezzar has made. And that is the most powerful threat we have. If people have conviction and they have courage of conviction, they'll stand up against things. And this is something which you historically find. Those with the most courage of conviction, they are the ones who have the biggest impact on the world. And God wants us to have courage on the matters of truth, the things which are of actual internal importance, the things which are absolutely true, not just circumstantially useful or pragmatic. But we live in a day and age where we have strayed from all of these things, and we are demoralized. We have people who don't know, what it means to be a man or a woman, and they want to hold these things in tension with one another without any sort of righteous accountability or righteous understanding of the world, and it's just gross. It's just chaos. And there's no real virtue because people are trained to appreciate fake virtue. We would much rather put the post online. We would much rather have the approval. We would much rather have people do all sorts of things which are corrupt.
Need something?
And that's just where we are. We would much rather do the corrupt things and take the sensation and talk about it for 5 minutes. A good example of this is a couple of weeks ago, it came out that here in Nashville, the Nashville mayor definitively concealed information to the public. Definitively concealed good coronavirus data, which again, if these people were on the up and up, they would be good news that the data was so low in the bars and in the restaurants. If they were people who were honest, they would say, this is good. We enjoy this. We enjoy having good news, and we want to celebrate good news, that we're having some victories over virus. But they didn't do that because they wanted control. There's really no other way to couch that. They conflated good news as if it's bad news, and you've seen this with Anthony Fauci saying, be wary of good news. Come on, man. You're in doing that, you're telling us that you don't actually take the virus seriously because you don't take good news to be good. It's only something which we should opine over if it's something which can be used to further the panic narrative, and that's very, very dangerous. But to the question of Nashville, and this is why this is the most powerful threat against us, nothing has been done to hold him accountable. There was a lot of talk about it, and I was actually very impressed to see how some local news agencies were willing to cover this. People who probably line up with him politically, but they were willing to move past that to see truth. But then once the sensation had run its course, we got our excitement, we had our jollies, we got furious, we got mad, but then nothing happened. That is the most powerful threat. Because it's the truth that we find biblically. The devil cannot come and take your soul. Not unless you are willing to turn away from God. If you're good with God, you're in a good relationship with God, you're going to be fine. But you have to willingly walk away from that in order for the devil to have you. And those are the big three threats we have. The most immediate threat being the unholy trinity of political chaos, the enemy of the truth news, mass possession by volatile insanity, will to power public figures. That house divided, that will fall. The most organized threat really is big tech and sort of its international implications. The most powerful threat is our own demoralization. So that's where we're going to end our conversation today. I thank you for spending time with me. Again, I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor, and this is the Nazarene Stream Preacher. And if you would like to reach out to me and talk about anything else, you have some other questions you would like me to address in another program, or even if you have any games or anything like that you'd like me to talk about, since I guess this is a channel where I do stream video games, even though I don't do a lot of playing the games, more or less background, but reach out to me. You can contact me on Parler at J. Dylan Proctor, and that's just the letter J for my first name. Or you can email me at jeffdylanproctor@gmail.com. And Dylan is spelled D-Y-L-A-N, Jeffdylan, Proctor, Proctor @gmail.com. If anyone would like to reach out to me, that is. But I think you're spending time with me. May God be with you, and don't let the world disrupt you, and don't let the world take your focus away from what matters most important. Love your family, love your church family, love your neighbors, love your people that you work with, even love your enemies. And have that Christ-like love that doesn't just want to bow down and serve the throne of hell, but look to serve the throne of heaven. So thank you for spending time with me. God love you, and have a blessed day.